Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about love in modern society and various manifestations of foolishness that we see around us. So now we're going to go for a bit of a change of pace and zoom out and take a look at the more transcultural aspect of romantic love and see how it might connect to the deep machinery of what it is to be human. And hopefully, in doing that, we might come to some kind of maybe positive prescription of like, how might we carry out love, dating, and romance in the modern world in a different way?
So the first thing I say is we should now shift to your interviewing, because the person who should be in my spot right now is my friend and colleague Jeff McDonald, because and one of the things that is really unfortunate is Jeff and I had one of the same kind of thing I had with Jordan Peterson and what I had with Dan Dolderman. Jeff McDonald and I had one of those masterminds or whatever called public discussions about love. And
awesome! I'll have to go check that out.
Yeah, no, it was lost.
It was lost?
The recording got messed up.
Oh, what a shame.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's the correct response. That is the correct response. I'm hoping that maybe he and I could do something again. And Jeff has a line, and the fact, and Jeff and I become friends, pretty good friends, and I have a lot of respect and affection for Jeff. And I've sort of asked him about this, and he sort of said, yeah, that my suspicions were right. He says that attachment series is the way, the truth, and the life about relationships. And I don't know if you guys know it because of biblical illiteracy. He's actually alluding to a quote from the Bible, from the book of John, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then Jeff is invoking. So he's invoking the stuff we've been talking about, how romanticism has sort of co-opted religious machinery and tries to take the role, but then he's subverting it by pointing to an actual scientific theory that we should be paying great attention to. And I just think that's really brilliant. And it's rhetorically brilliant. And it bespeaks. He describes himself as a contrarian, but he's such a playful and insightful contrarian, and that's just there. And I think that's something really important. And he's a better person to talk to about this. Like, we have to pay attention to, and this is where we can make use of the work of Siegel and Hutto and others about how constitutively necessary and formative of personhood attachment relationships are. And that we carry that with us deeply in the grammar of our developmental needs. And so that it informs and inflects and can distort all of the relationships we pursue, not just romantic relationships, but also friendships in very, very powerful way.
Can you just briefly summarize what the theory of attachment series is?
Yeah. So let's go back and then what I just want to make a connection to something we said earlier. One of the things I did in the discussion with Jeff is I sort of took these ideas he was giving about attachment and brought in some of the stuff we've been talking about, agape, as person making, and also the Vygotskian stuff that we could talk a bit about. And that was, I think we both felt that was a very fruitful, conjoining. Sorry, I just used a conjugal metaphor there.
Excellent.
So attachment theory is, the idea that we're, for very important, the fact that we're not the product of an intelligent designer, but evolution, which was, sort of, when you talk about evolution, is language makes us talk about it as if it's a teleological agent, and it is not. Two more times. It is not. Okay. So, but nevertheless, what happens is there's selection for big brains and there's selection for bipedalism. Those are in conflict with each other. Bipedalism keeps the pelvis narrow. Big brain needs the pelvis to widen. And so we have this horrible thing where we're often kill the mother, and we're born ridiculously premature, and most of the brain's growth is taking place outside. This also gives time for our other big need, which is we need to learn culture, because it's our big, hugest, overwhelming adaptation. So for all of these reasons, we're born helpless, and what that means, and so we need something to devote itself to us, and turn us into a cultural being. And you can see why how agape fits into there right away. But that bonding, that like sort of psychologically primordial bonding that makes the agape possible, that gets the parent committed to the child and the child like receptively oriented in a adaptive way to the parent, that bonding, that's the attachment relationship. And man, you feel it when you have a kid. Like it's a powerful experience. I remember, especially for my first son, right? Like having a kid is horrible. Sorry, let me like for the first 3 months, it's one of the like it's horrible because like it's and that's why communities used to surround and support people who had a newborn child, because it is just so it's impacting you and on levels you don't even understand. Like it calls out egocentrism you weren't even aware with, like, and it's your health is suffering and your relationship with your beloved is suffering. And it's just like, oh, what have I done? Like, what have I done? Right. And anybody who claims, I'm just deeply suspicious of anybody who claims they don't come to parts where they're sitting up at 3 a.m. and the child has now been asleep for maybe 47 seconds. And they're like, what have I done? What have I done? Right. And what happens about 3 months in, you're getting to that fatigue and then the child smiles at you. And it's a real smile. It's not like a gas bubble smile. It's a real smile. There's eye contact. There's a smile. And then you can feel it. You can feel this like whoosh run through your brain. And you just go, wow, I'm so glad I did this. That's attachment. Whoa. Right? It's like, and it's evolutionary necessary, because if your parents don't commit to you for a long time, 15 years, you aren't going to be viable. And you're born absolutely helpless. You're a helpless, like, at least cognitively, non-person that has to be tended and cared for and protected until personhood. And that's minimally 15 years. And that's a dramatic cost. So what we have is, it looks like we've evolved for machinery that makes us, the parent, deeply attached to the child, and the child, therefore, reciprocally deeply attached to the parent. And then the idea is that, of course, I'm talking about the ideal, but of course, there's all kinds of ways in which that can go better or worse. And what that does is that sort of ingrains into you, the attachment ingrains into you a fundamental template and grammar of how you understand, and I don't mean up here in introspection, I mean in an active cognition, how you understand relationships. So like if you were anxiously attached, that's to your parents, like in which they were giving you, ambivalent signals about wanting to be in the attachment relationship, you're going to carry that anxious attachment into your romantic relationships. And there's just lots of empirical evidence for this. And people don't like to hear this because they want to believe the romantic bullshit that it's all just a matter of will and choice and my impulsive attraction to a person. Look, your brain it seeks to predict. It prefers predictive unhappiness over unexpected happiness. It will seek out familiarity at the expense of taking a risk. In fact, there's ways in which certain options won't even become salient to you, even though those are the good choices to make, precisely because your brain is going, and this sounds creepily Freudian, but I'll speak first. Obviously, this is not occurring in my introspective awareness, so I'm giving voice to something that doesn't actually speak in my mind. But, hey, she's a lot like Mom. And she's making me sad the way Mom did. I'm going to be with her. Because she's making me sad the way Mom does. And so I understand that because it's my only way of predicting relationships, because that's the only grammar I have. And so I'll keep getting involved with these women that make me sad. Because Mom made me sad. Or I'm anxious and I'm ambivalent. I got ambivalent. So I was constantly having to seek out Mom and make sure she still loves me. And I'm going to carry that into my romantic relationship. And that's what I meant earlier about you got to get some serious self-knowledge. You got to really figure out what your attachment style was and what it is. And, you can't change it by a matter of will or belief. You have to go through, and Jeff would back this up 100%. You have to go through deep therapy to change your attachment styles. Like you do. It's not, you can't just, I don't want to do that anymore. Because what you'll find, and this is so maddening, right? You'll find, I'm doing this. I'm going to do the opposite of what I've done before. I'm going to look for people, and I do this. Wait, I've done it again. I've done it again. I'm with the same kind of person again. The very attempt to do the opposite, right, made possible ending up, here I am again. That's how powerful and profound attachment theory is. And you can't get away from it because it's just wired in. But you don't, and if you are in either the having mode, which locks you into holding on, or romanticism, you are not going to get free from any of the ways in which the attachment machinery is screwing up your life. You're not going to get free. The romanticism and or the having mode stuff is just going to lock you in, and you are not going to ever be free. You have to be willing to commit to bringing in sapience, getting into dialogos with a therapist, pursuing new psychotechnology, increasing your self-understanding. You've got to go through a lot to address that machine. That's why I say, people who enter into a lot of these innovations and have not pursued this kind of deep self-awareness, they're really overestimating their capacities.
Yeah, it seems like you almost need kind of an eightfold path in order to break you out of this parasitic processing.
Yeah, I think you need something like, there's a book out there that I read when I was dating called If the Buddha Dated, which was, to try to bring things like the Eightfold Path to bear on this. This is why you see, in the Socratic framework, there's such a deep interpenetration of these three things, of eros, love, the cultivation of wisdom, and the realization of self-knowledge. And all of this is happening within collective rationality. That's why those are all wedded together so deeply and profoundly in the Socratic practice. We should definitely, people should definitely read If the Buddha Dated, but we should also write a book, If Socrates Dated, or something like that, to also bring in, some of that machinery to help us.
So I wanted to bring up something, before. I'm not sure if this is related to this section or the last section, but I think it's important. It's the idea that it seems to me that an important aspect of meaning is, and it's really simple, it's how long you spent doing something and how much effort you put into it. And you alluded to this when you were talking about the effort that it requires to raise a child. Basically, I think if raising a child were easy, then the sense of meaning that you get when the child smiles at you wouldn't be as profound. I think a lot of it is exactly because you put all of that, because you went through that hell, essentially. And so it's almost like capitalism is making things so easy for us that we can't, like, it's almost impossible to like put a lot of effort into something.
Yeah, it's in one sense. In another sense, and this is what Hahn talks about in his books on like the scent of time and the agony of eros, a book about eros I would recommend, is that. But we've also moved to the achievement culture where, and this is where he gives a very strong critique of Foucault, in which people don't need to be oppressed. All we have to do is get them into an achievement culture, and then they will just self-exploit themselves to burnout and death. We don't have to oppress them. And so there's ways in which things are also made really, really hard for people. They're incapable. That's why he calls it the agony of eros. They can't enter into a relationship to the other because they are so deeply invested in self-exploitation. The other thing I would say, so that's one thing to bring into what we're talking about. The other thing is the phenomena you're pointing to, it overlaps with a kind of bias, which is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is that there should be we don't like it when our actions and our beliefs it has to be in awareness. When our actions and our beliefs are antithetical. And we resolve it either by changing our actions, changing our beliefs, or bullshitting ourselves. Those are the three strategies, right? The thing about cognitive dissonance is exactly that, because You get people to find a task that they find really menial and tedious, like moving pegs around on, and then you make it really, so they have to put a lot of effort into it. And so what cognitive dissonance will kick in and say, because you put a lot of effort into it, it must have been valuable. And so you have to be really careful about that. You have to be really, really careful that independent of just, I put a lot of time into it, therefore it's valuable. Do you have other measures of why it's meaningful to you? So, yeah, I understand what you're saying. And there's a sense in which I'm not saying that you shouldn't ever pay attention to how much effort you've put in, because it is something to pay attention to, because you might step back and say, oh, maybe this thing is valuable because it needs so much effort. That's legitimate. But just to accept that heuristic, it's like, oh, therefore it must be valuable. That's to let it become a bias for you. So what I recommend is like, yeah, in addition to, yeah, I worked hard a lot on this and therefore it might be valuable. Bring that up. Legitimate, but without automatically falling prey to the bias of cognitive dissonance. Ask yourself, well, do I have other ways of, independent of that converge on this being meaningful? And then you have to be rational about this, because, confirmation bias will kick in and oh yes, here's all the other stuff that confirms that it's meaningful. So you might want to look for, is there any evidence that it's actually not very meaningful?
Yeah,
Right.
geez. I mean, that bias surely plays into a lot of relationship problems.
Yes, very much. So that bias and the sunk cost fallacy both kick in. It's valuable because I put so much time into it, and also, the sunk cost fallacy. I've invested so much on it, I'm going to lose it all if I don't stay. So yeah, those both kick in.
Honestly, one of the most terrifying things to me in thinking about the future and romantic relationships is, at least my perception is, a huge percentage of the quote unquote successful marriages that I see seem to be just operating on the sunk cost fallacy. And like, that's all.
Yeah, that can definitely be the case. I've talked to Jeff about this, and I hope my hope is rational hope. So that's kind of a weird meta hope. And this is why I said, we've got to get good. So we've got to get the self-knowledge. We also have to have the science, and then we also have to have the practices, the ecology of practices. We have to get good at all three loves, at Eros, Philia, and Sophia, and agape. Sorry, I was putting Philia and Sophia together. Sorry. Philia and agape. Although Sophia matters too, I suppose. and so my understanding, and this is again something that I've tried to foreground this time around, is the long-term relationships, the ones that aren't just sunk cost fallacy. And I'm really acknowledging that's a thing. I'm not denying that at all. Right. But Jeff says that what you get is, right, the philia, people will say, I'm staying with this person because they're my very best friend. Right. And so notice what we are not talking about at all well in our culture, and what the romantic comedies are absolutely useless about. And we need to talk about it more. And I think this goes back to our point about the manosphere. I love that word, by the way. What we're not talking about in any really deep way, and there's no excuse because we have Plato and Aristotle and the Stoics, and, we're not talking about friendship. What do you do to be, like, how do you get good at being a friend? And who's helping you to first of all, bring that question up, then frame it properly, formulate it properly, and then guide you to trying to aspire and go through the developmental trajectory of becoming a good friend. Because you think you're just naturally good at friendship. You're about as naturally good at friendship as you are naturally good at anything else that's complex and difficult within a very complex environment, which is you're not very good at it. Right? And so, we confuse things together. I make a distinction between a buddy and a friend. A buddy is somebody that is fun to be with. You do fun. They're fun to do. You have fun together. And you should have buddies. Of course you should, right? But a friend, a friend is somebody that, that you are, you're bound together. Aristotle said it's like one soul, one self in two people. You're bound to them because you are committing to each other's becoming better persons. So a friend should be somebody who helps you seek the truth and the good and the beautiful and seek how you should seek that. And we don't talk about any of that. And, and again, we lost that. And romanticism was shit in talking about friendship because it's the rugged, tortured individual, right? But there was something analogous, again, within Christianity. There was fellowship. So fellowship was this thing that bound people together within agape and was was an intermediary between friendship and agape. And so it bound philia of friendship to the agape of the community. You had fellowship. So you had agape and you had philia, friendship, and you had fellowship. And this was and then you had guidance in all three of those being modeled to you. And we have none of that. We have none of that, right?
So are you advocating for the idea that the person that you're romantically involved with should be like a really good friend?
Yes. In fact, I think that you should, I don't want to speak too, enjoy the initial months of, infatuation, and you just have to touch the person a lot and all that sort of stuff, right? Enjoy that. It's a lot of fun. But if you want a long-term relationship, I think all three loves should be seriously cultivated in a mutually informing fashion. You should really know how to pursue eros well. What does it mean to try and join, integrate, unify? Because that's what eros is driving you towards. What does that mean with a person? I know what it is to unify with a cookie. I eat it, right? But a person isn't the kind of thing that a cookie is. So what does eros mean there? And then, of course, there's agape, right? Because one of the things we're doing, and this is how agape and philia overlap, is one of the things I'm doing is I'm committing, right, I'm committing to caring for the conditions of her meaning making. Right? I'm committing to that. That's agape, right? I'm going to commit to the conditions under which Sarah can make meaning and come into personhood. And then there's philia, friendship, and she commits to mine, and then we have a reciprocal relationship. We have reciprocity in the mutuality of the agapic relationship, where we are pursuing we're pursuing a bond in which we are mutually affording development along the being mode. The pathway from within the being mode. And so I think if you have all of those, again, I'm not giving you an algorithm. I don't think this can be rendered into an algorithm. I don't offer rules, 12 rules or whatever. I'm trying to offer you tools, not rules, right?
12 Tools for Life by John Vervaeke.
So I think that but I think if people were really pursuing wisdom, the self-knowledge and the knowledge of, the difference between intelligence and rationality and individual intelligence and collective rationality, all that we talked about that, and then bringing it in so that they got a developmental trajectory that's self-correcting and self-transcending, whereby they are cultivating the three loves with a deep understanding in a relationship, I think that could portend a long-term and also satisfying relationship that is not just held together by romantic bullshit or some institution or the sunk cost fallacy.
I wanted to say, I think the distinction that you made between friendship and buddyship is really important, especially with this notion that's often repeated that your spouse, if you're going to have a spouse, should be your best friend. Yeah. I think I was taking that the wrong way. I was hearing friend like buddy, and yes. I don't know if that's the case, that your spouse needs to be your best buddy. How do you feel about the relationship between like love and buddyship, or do you think it's important that a romantic relationship be like a really strong buddy also?
Yeah, no, I don't think when I say best friend, I'm using that in contradistinction to best buddy.
Right.
I don't think your partner should be your best buddy. So I think I'm in total agreement with how you're applying the distinction. Now, I want to bring a nuance into that. I think because, again, things get commodified and therefore locked down. The buddy is somebody you play with, but there's different kinds of play. There's what I call, there's the more frivolous play in buddyship, and then what I call serious play. Because play is also a developmental thing. That's how a lot of development works. And so there should be an aspect of serious play within your romantic relationship, but it's not the same kind of play that you do when you're playing with like when you're playing with your buddies. Because the goal isn't the generation of fun, the serious play within a relationship, but it's still nevertheless playful. It's about the kind of play in which you're inducing wonder, you're affording aspiration, you're platforming self-transcendent for the other person, and they're reciprocating. It's important that you don't want to be overly Protestant about your long-term relationship. You don't want to think of it, it's all just work. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not, but I think, I don't think you're like, there's going to be lots of things that are buddy activities that is probably in fact not a good idea to include your spouse or your partner. Right? I agree with that wholeheartedly. The one nuance I want to put in is I didn't want the buddy to have the sole privilege of play. I think that's a mistake.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, it sort of gets at this idea that I was thinking about a bit while I was listening to your lectures yesterday, and you alluded to it earlier, is like this idea of like the romantic partner, like when you were discussing symbols in your lecture series, and sort of how, I'm not going to articulate it as well as I'm sure you're about to, but you talked about how people interact and play with a symbol and how it's like this reciprocal process. And it really reminded me a lot of how, like, what romantic love is like. Yeah, I mean, maybe you can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, so, I mean, and again, this is a Platonic notion when I went back where instead of idealizing your romantic partner, you can engage with them in the serious play of them being symbolic, them being an icon. And I'm using that not just in the iconic sense, but in the religious sense, like in Eastern Orthodoxy, where there's icons. And the icon, right, what's his name? The guy who wrote God Without Being. Oh, his name is escaping me right now. Because he makes a distinction between the idol. Is it Marion? Anyways, he makes a distinction, Jean-Luc Marion, I think it is. He makes a distinction between the idol and the icon. Yeah. So the idol, like, it fixes your gaze and you get a kind of a saturation, right? Right? And it's again a having thing, right? Whereas the icon is always beckoning you beyond. So, the icon provokes wonder rather than satisfying curiosity. It puts you into mystery rather than giving you security, all those kinds of things. And so if you enter into the serious play, because serious play is what you need to go through transformative experience to engage in aspiration, because you can't reason your way. I want to be very careful here. You can't infer your way through a transformation. And I give arguments for that in the series. Based on the work of L.A. Paul, great work, and the excellent work also of Agnes Callard and others. You need serious play to get you through those, and that's why children do it, right? I think if you enter into mutual serious play with your romantic partner, they can be, in the sense I've tried to stipulate, they can become iconic for you. They can become symbolic. And this is, so a clear example of serious play in which the other becomes iconic for you is Tantra. Both Tantric, both the Hindu version and the Buddhist version of Tantra. Because it's about serious play, in which your beloved becomes, right, an icon for you about the mysterious depths of being, and in a way in which you can directly confront it directly, and I mean this in all of its embodiment, you can directly face it and come into an inactive participation with it. And then you can use that framework to take it into the deepest levels of your psyche and your brain by coupling it to erotic behavior. And so, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just learning about it and reading it. And many people confuse Tantra. They think it's about learning how to be a sexual athlete so you can sort of, prolong orgasm for 6 hours or something like that. That's not what it's about. It's about the serious play that allows you to enter into a participatory conformity with your partner so that they become iconic and you become iconic for them, of a developmental pathway into the heart of the mystery of being. That's what it's about.
So it sounds like you're kind of, both people are mutually using each other as symbols or icons.
I just want to change the verb from using to playing with.
Sure. Okay. So people are mutually playing with each other, as icons.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of a lens or something that they're looking through reality at, and they're getting this participatory, knowledge of the world.
Because think about how these two come together. So in love, as opposed to lust, what's happening? And again, Jeff would be better on this, but this is what the research shows. You engender love by mutually accelerating disclosure. Mm-hmm. So I disclose something about me. I reveal, rather than controlling and manipulating, I reveal something about me, often something that's a vulnerability. And if you reciprocate and, disclose aspects about you, so you come more into the being mode in front of my eyes and disclose, if we start to do this, if we get mutually accelerating disclosure, that's what it is to fall in love. But that's also the machinery of anagogic self-transcendence. This is Plato's great insight. I see more deeply into reality. It discloses itself more to me. And then that takes me more deeply into the machinery of the psyche. It gets rearranged, right? So that gets disclosed transformatively. And then I'm now oriented more deeply towards reality. And the thing, it does that mutually accelerating disclosure. It's the opposite of the reciprocal narrowing in an addiction. It's the reciprocal opening up of anagogic self-transcendence. But that's also the machinery of love. And so that's what Tantra was on about. And that's what Plato was on about. That's what's going on in the symposium. Anagoge, the anagogic ascent to the good, is bound up with the reciprocal disclosure of love.
Cool. So I wanted to bring up something that we talked about earlier, which is opponent processing. And I wanted to tie that together with something that we've been talking about on some of our previous episodes, which is this idea of the polarity between the masculine and the feminine. Right. And I thought that it kind of struck me when I heard the idea of opponent processing. I was like, oh, it seems like there's this bioeconomy, and we have on the one hand resilience, and on the other hand efficiency. It seems like maybe the masculine is sort of in charge of one, and the feminine is in charge of the other. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. That's a great idea. I don't want to answer right now because that's just a really good idea, and I feel it would be disrespectful to just answer. Don't. Maybe let's make that. Yeah, the idea that instead of trying to tie it down to sort of biological sexual reproduction organs or something like that, we understood, because this would also be profound and primordial, we understood masculinity and femininity more towards, like you say, some of the constitutive constraints on our bioeconomy and a preferential structuring of the virtual engine, so that you're not only getting, the opponent processing within individuals, but within the distributed cognition. That's what you're proposing, right, Chris? Is it something like that?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's bloody brilliant. I hadn't thought of that at all. And that would be an interesting and alternative way of trying to ground this, that could perhaps take it out of the politically fraught way in which we're wrestling with these terms and link it to the guts of the meaning-making machinery. You should do something about that. That is brilliant. That is really good. I think that has real potential. I mean, I'm not in the place where I can just sort of endorse it, but I can endorse it as a really good idea that really should be taken seriously. I think that's really good.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. I've also been thinking about the masculine feminine divide in the context of the political sphere, where it seems like, there's always these two halves, and they're always they're working together, but they're also fighting. And that, as you said, in politics, we have opponent processing, is what you said, and that if we don't trust each other, then the self-corrective nature kind of falls apart.
Exactly, and then it becomes the adversarial zero-sum game, winner take all, and then you get a conquest mentality being brought into sexuality, which is what, of course, all the players, right? That the player mentality is the conquest mentality brought into relationships, right? So it's a zero-sum game. I've got to conquer. That's the only way to get, that's the only good possible, because that's the only goal that makes sense within an adversarial setup. There was a metaphor that was striking me earlier when we were talking about how our political system is going from kind of a opponent processing to an adversarial position. You brought up a metaphor of like a body where your different body systems, like your limbic system and then your rational system, aren't or shouldn't be fighting against each other. They should be helping each other process. But in the body, if you go from opponent processing of different systems to like an adversarial thing, that's literally what cancer is when one... Yes. Yeah. One thing becomes a winner take all.
Yeah.
The clearest example, and it's directly relevant to this coupling to the environment, is the opponent processing between the opponent processing that's constitutive of the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic meaning self-regulating, self-governing, self-ruling, right? Autonomos, between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic system that's constantly calibrating, constantly evolving in this embodied, embedded, inactive fashion, the level of arousal. So your arousal is appropriate to the task at hand. And it's opponent processing. But what we can get is we can skew it. Imagine if the sympathetic system tried to kill the parasympathetic system. Sort of, right. This would be like stress on meth, right? And you would be just always hyper aroused and you would just die. I think that's exactly right. And cancer is another example of the opponent processing. The self-correction is giving way to an adversarial winner take all.
Yeah, I've heard the cancer metaphor used in the political arena recently, especially you'll hear a lot of people say like the men's rights movement is cancer or feminism is cancer. And I wonder if we're...
Yeah. I think if it brought your insight to bear, that would be great. In that it's like, and we should be dropping out of adversarial processing. I'm worried that it's just a purity code term for how we can cut out the thing we don't like. I just want to give a bit of credit where credit is due. I mean, I've been developing this idea about, opponent versus adversarial. But it originally goes back to work that Leo and Ferraro I did when he was working with me on my relevance realization theory. He said, this opponent processing stuff you're talking about biologically, that should be understood as relevant to the political domain. So I just wanted to give him credit here before things got going too far.
I don't know. Have we defined opponent processing?
So let's do it concretely with what I proposed to you as a good exemplification, which is the autonomic nervous system. So the sympathetic part of the nervous system it's biased. It's trying to interpret as many signals as possible as the signals that your level of arousal should be increased. So its goal is trying to collect in a biased fashion, right, as much evidence that arousal should be increased, right? The parasympathetic system also is biased. It's trying to collect as much evidence to reduce your level of arousal. Now, you need to raise your level of arousal, like if you need to fight something, or you need to climb, or need to lift, or there's all kinds of reasons, right? And then but you also need to reduce your level of arousal to heal, to rest, to recuperate, right? Right? And so they're pursuing opposing goals, but they're linked. They're not independent from each other. So as the sympathetic system, right, is pulling you in one direction, it's trying to shut off the parasympathetic system, and the parasympathetic system is also trying to shut off, right, the sympathetic system, but it's so designed that they can't shut each other off. So what they're doing is constantly pulling and pushing on each other so that you have a dynamical system that is constantly recalibrating your level of arousal. And you're getting a somewhat good interpretation of the environment precisely because of the opponent processing between them. You're pitting biases against each other so that they self-correct within a self-correcting calibration. And that's how... Now, is it a perfect system? No, it's not, but there is no perfect system possible. But it's way better than the sympathetic system winning out, or the parasympathetic system winning out, or the parasympathetic system saying, my way of seeing things is the only way, etc.
Wow.
Okay, so they're honestly embodying kind of two personalities that are opposed, but their opposition produces better results.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to give them the status of personalities, but something like that. They're, a way of framing information and interpreting it, and a way of thereby trying to affect the level of arousal. Yes.
Wow, that's so interesting. Like, maybe my brain is drawing spurious connections here, but it almost seems to me like the Republicans are the parasympathetic system, where they're like, no, everything is fine, let's just leave it how it is. And the Democrats are like the sympathetic nervous system. They're like, everything is terrible, we need to change.
It could be. I don't know. Or maybe at different times, because the Republicans can get very sympathetically triggering in that they, we're under threat and our borders are under threat, and they can do that sort of. So I think at different times they play to different things. But it could be that what we had is a party that represented conservatism and trying to slow things down and calm things down so that we don't become too disconnected from the wisdom of our history and our traditions and our institutions. That was in opponent processing with another system that says, no, we need to grow, we need to develop, there are new problems, and that's trying to promote restructuring and trying to speed things up. I could see what you're saying, like where we had sort of, a kind of opponent processing between a conservative and a progressive group of parties, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
Right. I agree with you. Like, I think that the conservative and the progressive fits into that dichotomy pretty well, but maybe our Democrats and Republicans today aren't exactly the ideal of what we think of as conservatives or progressives. It seems like the important part of this, like if you're going to have a opponent processing type system, like whether it be within the body, in the body, like these are systems that literally evolved within the body, so you don't need psychological trust. But in a political system, people need to trust that both sides or everybody's working towards the good of the country. And if we want to bring it back to love, if you're in a fight or some kind of a battle, or maybe not a battle, but ideally opponent processing with your partner, both partners need to trust that you're working towards the good of the relationship. And it seems like what's happening a lot is just the trust has broken down.
And I think that's excellent. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, and let's remember, we used to call it the body politic. We used to call it the body politic, that the political world was something like a body, because there was an expressed symbolic commitment to the health, the commonwealth, the common health, all that sort of stuff, right? Now, the fact that trust is broken down, I think that's a very important thing to say. And part of it has to do with an issue about commodification, and also, like, again, there's sort of a decadent romanticism that we've lost. See, one of the things that reason does and how it differs from intelligence, and you can see how this goes into some of the stuff we were saying about the being mode. Reason cares about the process of your cognition and not just its results, not just its bottom line productions, not just the products. So, and Stanovich talks about this as one of the fundamental commitments to being rational is to value and care about the process itself. And so in a relationship, for example, the relationship, my friendships, and also especially the relationship I have with Sarah, we have from the beginning a shared, and we constantly check in, a shared commitment to the process, to valuing the process, to valuing the communication process, to valuing the connection process, to spending time on, right? Let's sometimes it's serious play, sometimes it's more serious practice, but let's play and practice with the communication process itself, with the connection process itself, right? Independent of what outcome I want in situation X or what outcome she wants in situation X. There's so a lot of time on caring about and caring for the process, because that's the hallmark of rationality. And that's what I mean about how you could bring in sapiential rationality into your relationships. But if you're going in within the adversarial orientation is defined by not caring about the process at all. That's what makes it so fundamentally irrational. It's about winner take all. It's about winning. It's about the product. It's about the result. And what you need for trust and what you need for democracy and for the opponent processing to be self-correcting is you need people to have a deep, real commitment to the process. And that process, that commitment to that process is superordinate to and independent from their commitment to the particular results they're trying to achieve. And we used to have that. We used to have that people, right, could, and we're lucky in Canada because with minority governments, the parties are forced into that situation because they have to make the process work enough so they can stay in power long enough to get the results they want. It's pro tem, and I get that. But it's also why some of the best governing we've had, has been minority governments like Pierre Trudeau's 1972 and Pearson's ones in the 60s, right? Because people have to commit to the process. But if that became something that was not just expedient, but something that people deeply had internalized as a value, which people used to have, right? Then I think that would help to engender the trust. If I know you're committed to the process and not just to your goals, I know that there's a common ground that I can, in terms of which I can trust you. And that, right? And in terms of which real reciprocation is possible between us and real communication is possible between us. And this is the difference between substantive justice and procedural justice. And we're also too oriented towards substantive justice in our society. We want the just results. We want the just outcomes. And of course we should. I'm not saying that. But we're now getting to a point where people are talking politically about, I want that outcome and I don't care how it's achieved. Right. And all the issues of procedural justice is like, yeah, but how we achieve it is also independently something we have to value as a domain in which we pursue justice. How we pursue that just end is just as much something that comes under the normativity of justice as the results we're seeking. And so if we could get back to where we brought rationality into the political domain, meaning that we developed the personal sensitivity and sensibility to care about the process and not just the products, then I think we could start to get the grounding for the trust that is needed that you're talking about.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I was thinking when you were talking about this process that's needed and like relating it back to love and relationships too, and romantic relationships specifically, and I'm using that purposely. It seems like romanticism kind of gives us a horrible setup for any kind of process, because the process for our romantic relationship working is just, did we choose the right person who's like completely divine?
Yeah,
and that's
exactly. Exactly. I think that is really, really astute. Exactly. Yes, very much.
Focus on the product rather than the process.
Right. And that's why it's happily ever after. That's why it's happily ever after.
Yeah.
Because, right?
Yeah. You're looking for a person who is some kind of end product that is just perfect for you, and then it's happily ever after, as opposed to looking for a person whose mental processes and like trajectory of growth and like who they are, the way that they take in information from the world and process it. You want to look for a process that you respect.
Yes, that's so well said. Stop looking for the one. Instead, look for a friend who can co-commit with you to the process of mutual development. Yes, exactly. That was very well said.
It's like, maybe this might just be like a romantic bias, but I have this idea that like it's cool how you put it. There's like an optimal grip between like the shared commitment and the like polarity and difference. And I have this intuition that like the polarity and difference is in some way associated with passion. Maybe that's just my romantic decadence, but
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if I have the requisite. I've not put any reflective thought into that, so I don't know if I can bring any expertise to bear on it. I mean, the differentiation could also be driven by very sapiential developmental trajectories that people are on. Like, for example, it's very important to me that my partner is on a growth trajectory, because that's a sort of fundamental to my grammar, right? My developmental grammar. But she doesn't have to be growing in the domain that I'm growing in, or right. But that has to be something so that, right, even though our paths of growth are different and differentiating us, we share the value of growth and self-transcendence, and then that brings us together and integrates. So we have stuff we can talk about in terms of the shared process, and then we have ways in which we bring different perspectives into the discussion because we're on our growth arcs are different. That's the kind of thing I'm sort of having in mind.
So I want to kind of support what Ariel said, and I want to talk about eros in the context of a romantic relationship. It seems to me that as long as you trust the other person, their consuming of you can actually increase your attraction to them. Like that's
so you're gonna have to untease that. You're gonna have to unpack that a bit.
Yeah. So as the Cheap Trick song says, I want you to want me.
Yes.
The fact that the other person is attracted to me is attractive. It makes me attracted to them. Yeah. Yes, and so there's this kind of mutual eros going on where we're kind of consuming each other, right? But it's not consuming us. It's maybe it's creating a dynamic where stuff is getting created and destroyed.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could play with that a bit. Maybe what's being consumed is the difference between you and your, because that's what.
Ooh, good point.
Right. What's being consumed is the difference, because what's also happening is the mutually accelerating disclosure, which also differentiates the two of you, because you're, as you and the partner, disclose more in the mutually accelerating disclosure, their uniqueness and their particular idiosyncratic being in the world becomes more and more present in the situation. So while the distance is being consumed, there's a sense in which the differentiation is also being created in the mutually accelerating disclosure when things are working well, when there's an optimal grip occurring in the relationship,
and a trust in the process.
Very much, and that's the right word, and it goes back to. Again, our culture we haven't talked about this enough. Our culture has so impoverished all the other knowings beside propositional knowing. But all this stuff we're talking about, this is da'ath, this is the proposition, this is not the propositional knowing. Da'ath is the participatory knowing, the knowing in which my knowing of you is inextricably bound up with my knowing of me. That I know you not with my mind or even with my state of consciousness. I know you through the way in which my identity is being transformed. And this is like central in the Socratic project, that the self-knowledge and the other knowledge are bound together because we're talking about participatory knowing. We're not talking about propositional or procedural. And obviously there's also the perspectival, because we've been talking about getting the perspectives to be in a proper relationship with each other. And because our culture is so impoverished, talking about, and this is for Cartesian reasons, I think, so impoverished in talking about even the procedural, but even more so, the perspectival and the participatory, we are so impoverished when we wanted to talk about trust. We think of trust in propositional terms. There was this point where I think it was Jordan Peterson talking about with Steven Pinker. That was odd. But anyways, but Paul Van der Klee made this point that Peterson is bringing up communing, trust, and Pinker immediately replaces it with contract, with social contract. The core of community is communing, and Pinker goes contract, which is a propositional entity, right? That is bound by logical normativity, as opposed to what we're talking about here, which is the co-cultivation of a dynamical system that has a life of its own that we both commit to, because of that. If it has that logos, it can help both of us transcend ourselves through each other and in agapic and philiac and erotic love with each other. And the fact that, but when Pinker did that, it's like, oh my gosh, can you leave the propositional stuff alone for just a minute? Everything doesn't have to be a contract. There are other ways in which human beings couple, conform, and bond, religio, to the world other than through propositions.
Do you think that some of the problem and the reason why we're getting stuck in this like propositional sense of knowing is because like the systems that we're interacting with are so large and so far removed from us that there is no participating, really?
Yeah. So that's a real problem. Again, That's incredibly insightful. It's difficult to get things that are comprehensive and abstract enough without relying on propositional knowing. Now, we have done it in the past. So we've had ways of organizing large people in a culturally and individually efficacious manner so that they could coordinate together. And religions did that. And religions were brilliant at scaling and this is Paul van der Klee's idea, scaling the perspectival and the participatory such that they afforded vast social-cultural organization and coordination and cooperation. So,
yeah,
we have now. So, and again, I am all for a separation of church and state. So, Vervaeke wants to bring back the church.
Yeah,
that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening here. What I'm trying to show is the idea that the only way, and you can almost see why, if you're secular, it might, and Cartesian, it would seem like the only way you can get large scale coordination is through propositional processing and contracting,
mm-hmm.
right? But what I'm trying to say is that that's simply not metaphysically the case. We have a clear and pervasive, both across time and culture, right, example of perspectival and participatory ritual and serious play as a ways of coordinating sociocultural organization.
Yeah, I wanted to, sorry, just one thing. I know we're supposed to be talking about love, but I've been stuck on it. But when we were talking about like the breakdown of trust in our society, I was trying to think through, okay, how could we try to repair it? And I basically came up with three potential ideas. One would be try to come back from contempt, which the relationship therapists seem to think is not very likely. The other would be to try to alter the system so that there's more trust in the system. And then the third is kind of what you were just talking about, which I know you've been bringing up a lot in your lecture series, especially lately, is like the religion that's not a religion.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's why I've gravitated towards that. And that's why a lot of people are expressing a lot of interest in that idea, precisely because it looks like we need the functionality of religion, but for many people, the existing religions, especially the very creedal forms, which are propositionally oriented forms of this religion, no longer seem to carry that viable functionality that they're seeking. And so that's exactly why. I mean, there's a lot more here. And of course, you know that because there's a lot of argument there. But yeah, I think the connection you're making is exactly the connection I'm arguing for, that we need to take more seriously and we need to put a lot more work into. Yes, very much. So there might be some, that means there might be some very deep connections between the projects of trying to reformulate love and the religion of non-religion. Yeah, I think they are probably bound together in very important ways.
Wow.